Hey guys, today I'm going to talk to you about how to do the written response. It's going to be a type 2 written response, which we sometimes call a source analysis. And you guys are going to be doing it next week. Many of you will have to do it online. And so here are some steps on how to do it. These are the steps that we are going to go through together in class while you're away. So first thing we did in class was talk about the 3 rounds of globalization, a little bit of review here, right? Okay, and then we're talking specifically about events that took place during the time of historical globalization, right? So things that you have learned about, like the Columbian Exchange, the conquistadors, the time of imperialism, colonization of the Americas, the depopulation of the Americas because of disease, all of these things. These are events of historical globalization. Okay, so this is the question that you're going to be up against when you do your written response. It's going to be this question right here. What do 2 of the sources communicate about historical globalization? So you will be presented with 3 sources. You need to look at all 3 sources and decide which 2 of them you want to write about, right? So it's going to look something like this, where there are 3 sources. They're not going to look exactly like these 3. However, they'll most likely be pictures or charts or graphs or something like that, or maybe political cartoons, right? Those are the types of things you might see in the sources. So you need to look at all 3 and decide on which 2 of them you want to write about. And for each one that you choose, you need to write 1 paragraph. So in total, you will write 2 paragraphs for this written response. 1 paragraph about one of the sources and another paragraph about another source. So in class, we did a little bit of practice to see how things should go when the real test is done. So in class, we pretended that this was one of the sources, okay? So pretend you were given 3 sources and this was one of them, and you decided to write about this one, okay? So we need to think to ourselves, okay, what does this source communicate about historical globalization, right? So what does this source tell us happened during the time of historical globalization? Which events from that time period is this source telling us about? Okay, and that's that is what you need to do. So I suggest following these 3 steps in each of your paragraphs. So like I said, you're going to write 2 full paragraphs. And in each paragraph, I suggest that you describe the source that you have chosen and then answer the question about the source. So write a sentence that says, this source communicates that, blah, blah, blah. And then support your answer with evidence. Okay, the evidence that is like historical facts. It might be social studies concepts or social studies vocabulary, depending on the source. You either want to do the historical facts or the vocabulary or both, depending on the source. Okay, so let's do a little practice as if you were doing this source, okay? So this is the kind of paragraph that you could choose to write. It could look something like this. Source 1 is an illustration of the continents of the planet on which there are arrows pointed in opposite directions. Okay, so far we have described the source, right? Have we talked about historical globalization yet? No. No, we're staying on the surface right now. We're just describing what we see in the source. The next step is to think and to write about what this source tells us happened during the time of historical globalization. Which events is this source describing to us in its illustration? Okay, so this source communicates that the Columbian Exchange had an important effect on people during historical globalization. Okay, so we have answered the question. So the first 2 steps are usually much shorter, but the third step is the longest one. Okay, you are expected to write quite a few paragraphs, quite a few sentences in each paragraph. Most of those sentences should be in this third part, in the evidence part. So as Europeans traveled to the New World, which was called the Americas, they brought many things with them, including animals such as horses, pigs, and cows. For example, horses escaped from human control, formed large herds, and roamed wildly throughout the Americas. This affected the lives of indigenous peoples, as they domesticated the horses and used them to travel more efficiently. So we're talking about how the Columbian Exchange impacted the lives of indigenous people. Are we going over every single example? No, because that would be impossible. There are millions of examples. But I'm picking one, just picking one example, the horse, and explaining how it impacted the lives of indigenous people. And then continuing with another example of how the Columbian Exchange impacted the lives of European people. Also, the Columbian Exchange affected the lives of Europeans as they brought many New World plants back to Europe. For example, growing the potato in Ireland allowed many people to avoid famine and for the European population to explode and grow. Okay, so this would be one paragraph. You would have to do this for one source and then do it again for a different source. Okay, so yeah, this would be, I think, a pretty good paragraph. This would probably get like a grade of proficient, right, which is about 80%, right? It would probably receive a grade of about that. If you wanted to do even better than this, you could include some social studies vocabulary, right? You could maybe add a few vocabulary words in there and into the explanation, into the evidence portion. Okay, let's go over another example, but this time you're going to try it by yourself. So what does this source communicate about historical globalization? Let's pretend you were given this source to write about in your written response, right? So this is the source about a boy named Thomas More. And this is a picture of him before he attended the Regina Residential School, and this is a picture of him after beginning attending the Regina Residential School. Okay, and so while you are at home watching this video, my recommendation is that you practice writing a paragraph on this source. Okay, so describe the source, answer the question, right? Explain what this source tells us about what happened during the time of historical globalization, and then support your answer with evidence, right? So give some historical facts about what you know about residential schools, and then include some vocabulary, right? So maybe I'll give you a couple of suggestions. I recommend using words like assimilation, Eurocentrism, maybe the terms that we learned in class like uplift, civilize, and Christianize. What else would be useful? I mean, if you use all of those, that would be very good, right? White man's burden, you can relate it to the white man's burden. All of those would be good ideas for this source, but I will let you do it and let you do what you think is right. And then if you want me to check over your paragraph and give you some tips before you have to do the real written response next week, feel free to email it to me. Okay, so send me an email with what you wrote, and I can say, hey, this would get a grade of 70%. Here's what you could do to get 90%. Or I might say this would get a grade of 40%, right? This is what you can do to get 60%, right? So feel free to send me an email with your paragraph if you would like. You don't have to, but it might be a good idea. And I will give you some tips. Okay. So anyway, I hope that went well, and I hope this helps you, and I hope you have a good